And for every time the Biden campaign uses the shameful word convicted felon, they are not talking about inflation.
As I said, Maria, what they want is the label of convicted felon.
Right.
But you know what? The response to that from the American people is, we know you're lying. We know that that's not true.
MAGA snowflakes in the Republican Party and in right-wing media are apparently triggered by the fact that people are referring to convicted felon Donald Trump as a convicted felon. But both Democratic and Republican strategists are making the case that this is precisely what the Biden campaign and Democrats in general should be doing. It's not just funny, it's good strategy. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to look at in this video. It's funny stuff because, Ben Shapiro once famously said, "Facts don't care about your feelings, gang." And yet, right-wingers, again, both in the Republican Party and in right-wing media like Fox News, Newsmax, and other places, are so caught up in their feelings over the fact that Donald Trump is a convicted felon, and they do not want people to acknowledge that fact. So we're going to play some clips here, starting with Carolyn Leavitt, who is one of Donald Trump's press secretaries for the campaign. This is what she had to say about referring to Trump as a convicted felon.
And for every time the Biden campaign uses the shameful word convicted felon, they are not talking about inflation.
So again, the shameful word, convicted felon, by the way, 2 words, not one. I don't know if it's shameful. It's probably more shameful to be a convicted felon running for office, right? Certainly if you're running under the guise of being the leader of the Law and Order Party. But again, it's not just Carolyn Leavitt. Of course she would say that. She's a Trump press secretary. You also have Fox News hosts and Fox News guests like John Ratcliffe, a former U.S. attorney. This is what he had to say.
As I said, Maria, what they want is the label of convicted felon.
Right.
But you know what? The response to that from the American people is, we know you're lying. We know that that's not true.
We know you're lying. We know that that's not true. Well, it is true. He was convicted on 34 counts of falsifying business records as part of a conspiracy to steal the 2016 election. And those are 34 felonies. And again, facts don't care about your feelings, gang, but they can't help themselves because they're so sensitive. You also, again, have other Fox guests and Fox hosts as well trying to make the case that it's just inappropriate. It's so wrong. How dare you refer to Donald Trump as a convicted felon?
Yes, of course, but this is happening all across the country. What they've done to Trump, they're doing in states across the country. You see it in Michigan. You see it in Georgia. This is something that is incredibly dangerous. Attorneys general across the country think that they can do this. But let's not forget, these are people who ran on creating a crime, matching the president to the crime, and then putting him in prison. And now you have the president of the United States going, gosh, look, he's a convicted felon, and now you have to vote for me. I mean, this is one step away from Alexei Navalny. This is a very serious situation when you have the president of the United States taking his opposition and jailing them. What's next? And you're seeing this, like I said, you are seeing this in other states as well, where they are either finding, oh, this person will be my opposition, I'm going to create a crime and match them to it, or they're taking other people who have run and said, look, we want to make sure that they can't ever do it again.
So again, she's whining. She's like, how dare President Biden refer to his political opponent as a convicted felon? That's Alexei Navalny stuff. Alexei Navalny, of course, being a famous persecuted opponent to Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. Okay, well, Navalny was imprisoned and then he died as a result. Okay, Donald Trump has not been imprisoned and he's still alive. And Donald Trump was convicted by a jury of his peers in New York, a jury that he helped create, right? Because the prosecution and the defense both participate in the jury selection process. And by the way, it wasn't President Biden who ordered the prosecution of Trump. It wasn't even Biden's Department of Justice that carried out the prosecution of Trump. It was a Manhattan district attorney. But again, the Fox Propaganda Network never lets the facts get in the way of a good story. But they're so upset. How dare you refer to Trump as a convicted felon? One last thing I want to show you here before we get into responses, chiefly from Republican strategist Sarah Longwell, who thinks that the Democrats should be going on the offensive. You have this right-wing loser, Ford O'Connell, says, top Dem owner outlines the Biden election interference plan against Trump. And what is the election interference plan, you might ask? Alex Soros says Democrats should refer to Trump as a convicted felon at every opportunity. Repetition is the key to a successful message, and we want people to wrestle with the notion of hiring a convicted felon. So his strategy, and again, we'll get into this, is referring to Donald Trump factually for what he is, a convicted felon. And these right-wing losers say that's election interference. Again, so I made fun of a Democrat. Hey, you should call this convicted felon a convicted felon. MAGA cultist, that's election interference. These people are such snowflakes. I delight in making fun of them as well. You should too, because again, if the shoe was on the other foot, imagine a Republican was being opposed by a convicted felon for president or for any other office, but running as a Democrat. You think that they would hesitate to refer to that person as a convicted felon? Of course not. So that brings us to the Republican strategist, in particular, Sarah Longwell. She's a longtime Republican strategist and pollster, one of the best in the industry, and she believes that it's in Democrats' best political interest to capitalize on this, to exploit it, to make sure that they make it a political issue because it's a fact that's damaging to Donald Trump. And I think she's right, but we'll talk about that after the clip.
Because you spend time talking to voters in these focus groups, and you've also doing your own part. You're part of an effort to put out these billboards of "I won't vote for a convicted felon," which is a new campaign in a bunch of different states. Republican voters, former Trump voters saying they won't vote for him. Do you think these sort of wildly different views of the law get through to voters, and certainly to the voters that matter?
Okay, so listen, when you were playing that montage of Republicans, they were all saying the same thing. You noted this. I come from a background in Republican communications, and what they are doing is they are building their own echo chamber, right? They are constructing their own narrative. They are going on offense. Obviously, in a normal, sane world, the facts of a convicted felon president would be very bad when it comes to swing voters. But they know that if they push, if they go on offense, if they lie, if they spin, but they all say the same thing together unanimously, that they can amplify this message, and that sort of breaks through so much of the noise in the social media. And that's what sort of breaks through to voters. And so one of the reasons we wanted to do this billboard campaign is that Democrats need to go on offense. Democrats need to start building their own echo chamber. They need to explain to voters that it is insane to have a president who is convicted of a crime. If they want to argue about, should it have been a felony versus a misdemeanor, let them do that. He is a convicted felon by a jury of his peers for crimes that he committed. And as we know, he's been indicted in many other crimes. This is a moment to go on offense to make sure voters hear the message of Trump's conviction, not what Republicans are doing. But this is one way in which Democrats often do not rise to the sort of same communications challenge that Republicans do. And I think that there's a lot of reasons for that: fragmented coalition and unwillingness to lie shamelessly, potentially. But there does need to be an effort to make sure that this sticks to voters right now.
Right. And the beauty of it is Democrats don't have to lie shamelessly. It is simply a fact. It is a matter of fact. It's not a matter of opinion. And it's okay to make fun of people who suggest otherwise. Donald Trump is a convicted felon. All we would have to do is just tell the truth and tell it relentlessly, tell it creatively, tell it in rhetorically persuasive ways, tell it from the mouths and the words of persuasive Democratic operatives or Democratic affiliated operatives. I think Sarah Longwell's right. And as you know, on this channel and in interviews I've had with Democratic congresspeople, this is something that we talk about, that Democrats have a messaging challenge. Not to say that they aren't talented messengers. They're talented messengers completely within the Democratic fold, but it's a greater burden. It's easier for Republicans to message because they have simpler messages. They have an ecosystem which is much more conducive to signal boosting their right-wing messages. But also, again, Democrats do also have some internal issues as well. Some people, for example, a lot of people believe that it would be wrong or it would be a politicization of Donald Trump's guilty verdict, even if they support it. Like we just, the Michelle Obama ethic, when they go low, we go high. And I'm with Charlemagne the God and a bunch of others like, nah, we got to shred that. That didn't work out for Michelle Obama's husband, President Obama. He struggled with that, even though in good faith, he repeatedly reached out to Republican lawmakers to work bipartisanly. They slapped him down every time. I think there's a time for ruthlessness. And so we got to set the Michelle Obama playbook aside and go hard against Donald Trump in this respect. And again, especially because right now, and this opportunity may pass, there is no guarantee that what I'm about to tell you will be true a week from now. But right now, the ground is fertile to cement this perception of Trump, because the initial polls after Trump's conviction have been devastating to him. We'll talk about this in other videos as well. Majorities agree with the verdict in poll after poll after poll. Yes, Republicans remain firmly behind Trump, but there is a subset of the Republican base that will no longer support him, so they say. And independents as well. Swing voters seem to support Trump's conviction, again, but it's still very early. The top line is there is serious potential, which initially is favoring Democrats, but facts don't speak for themselves, and we can't let these opportunities slip through our fingers. We have to exploit them for political benefit, just like a Republican would if they had the facts on their side. And to be clear, too, it's not just Democratic operatives. It's also people like, Dan Pfeiffer and Brian Butler. They make the case in Off Message. This is Brian Butler's blog. I follow him. He's a great, he writes these great messages, these great blogs, advising Democrats about strategy. And one of his recurring themes is be more ruthless, be more aggressive, go on offense. You have Dan Pfeiffer, one of my favorites, one of the co-hosts of Pod Save America. Even he, who tends to be a bit more moderate, I think, in terms of Democrats going on offense. He occasionally advocates for it. Sometimes he doesn't. Even he says, no, we have to make political hay of this. This is a glorious opportunity. And there's just no reason not to. So, again, it does two things. It's good strategy, according to these tried and true Democratic and Republican strategists. And also, it's hilarious to trigger MAGA by pointing out that even though they claim to be the party of law and order, their candidate, their cult leader, is indeed, unlike our candidate, a convicted felon. It's fun to point that out, and especially see how they melt down in response. So, guys, you have two motivations. Great strategy, and it's going to make you feel good to trigger MAGA. Why not do it? Let me know what you think in the comments.